This
I have just
conference will
started
now be recorded.
recording and I will like to begin. First of all, good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Where are you from? And I would like to thank you so much for attending this online session on 20 troubleshooting tips and tricks for DBAs for database 19C by Sandesh Rao. And on behalf of Nepal Oracle User Group, I would like to thank Sandesh for accepting this invitation to present this online session.
Thank you
And
so much.
as Sandesh has already mentioned that Oracle Database 19C is more advanced in comparison to 11G, and a lot of new features have been introduced to make DBA's life easier, right? So we have Sandesh Rao presenting 20 such awesome troubleshooting tips and tricks to make our life easier. Basically, it's making our life easier. And these tools are very helpful to quickly rectify and fix the issues. As you are aware that Sandesh Rao is VP running the AIOps Autonomous Database Group at Oracle Corporation, and if you have met him before, then you will know that how active he is. I met him during Sangam18 and Sangam19, and believe me guys, he was the most energetic and motivating person during the session. And in future, we'll definitely invite him to our country to present and motivate us so that we can stay hyperactive with the technologies as he does. And as usual, I would like to remind we have a lot of limitation in this webinar tool, so I humbly request everyone to stay mute until the end. And you may raise your question via text in the chat section anytime, and we will try to grab them and reply during the session itself. Lastly, I would like to request to fill up the feedback forms. You will get the feedback form in the chat section, and your feedback and comments are very valuable to us. So guys, please fill them up. Now, with no further delay, I would like to hand over the control to Sandesh, and Sandesh will start with his introduction and exciting sessions. So guys, let's enjoy the session.
Thank you so much. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everybody, wherever you are, from whichever part of the world you've joined. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the Nepal Oracle User Group. You know, I was born in a small little town called Udupi in Karnataka in India. So I spent 26 years of my life in India before I moved to the States. I've always seen these beautiful pictures of Nepal. And I'm hoping that sometime this year during the AIOUG conference, I'll actually have the opportunity to come and see all this in person. So thank you so much for the invite. I'm going to, yeah, thank you. So my background is I've actually spent enough time working on databases, RAC, data guard. I've been in Oracle for more than 20 years. The last 2 to 3 years I've basically spent working on all AI and machine learning related technologies on the Oracle database, as well as we use a lot of these things in the AIOps side for automating DevOps operations for the autonomous database. This presentation is going to be focused on what troubleshooting tips and tricks. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to go through this really fast. Now, there are 3 things that are important that you need to know. If you need to follow me, that's my Twitter handle out there. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's my LinkedIn thing down there. And if you want to access these slides, they're either there in that link or Dilly's going to share them with you after this presentation. So this is the only slide that you need to take a picture of. All the other slides you can gain access to by just pulling the stuff from the web. So without further ado, let's get started. So this is basically what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover all of these 20 tips and tricks. It's a lot of stuff. I'm going to go through this pretty fast. So my goal is to try to finish this off within, say, 45 minutes, and then we can take questions. First one is, a lot of people try to understand what system state dumps are. And basically they say, I want to read them. I want to try to figure out how to troubleshoot them. So what I thought is I'll go through just a couple of things that will give you information about what a system state dump is. Many times you're working with product support, they will ask you to take system state dumps. A system state dump is like a snapshot of the entire database system and everything that is happening in every process. Each of these system states consists of multiple process states, and a process state is made up of these things called state objects that hold details of everything that's basically happening within that process. Now you use this to find out which process is waiting for which sessions. You can recursively navigate a particular process and find out what it's waiting on. And when something is running on the CPU and you want to find out why it is blocked, you can basically get something called an error stack to understand why it is blocked. A typical thing when you do is, when you're looking at system state dumps, you will see process 41 waiting for something, and you'll see mode is 5458.006. The way you interpret this is 5458.006 is ASCII. You can split it off, it's TX006, which makes it a TX lock in exclusive mode. That's how you interpret the mode. As you go into more details, you have to look for the string rec.ruq, and as you search through this, you'll find a request. In this case, this particular TX lock has been requested in exclusive mode for this particular resource. And then you also find out what the NQ resource is. The NQ resource is the TX-something-something, which ends in FA04, and that is used to also search for the holder. Then you grep for the TX NQ string, you'll come up with the section that says TX, and then the mode is X, which basically means that somebody is holding this TX NQ in an exclusive mode. So how do you find out who the holder is? You continue looking through the system state, and then you find something that's waiting for row cache lock, but it has the same object ID and it has the same CID resource. The CID resource shows DC users. DC users is basically a dictionary cache object type. Mode equal to X shows the lock is basically held in exclusive mode. So this is a row cache wait. So I'm trying to find something that's holding a TX lock. The TX lock is being held by a process that is waiting for a row cache lock. So this is how you go one level to the other level, and then you continue drilling deeper. In this case, you find out that this process is waiting for this row cache lock, and it's requesting in a shared mode, or request equal to S. And to find the holder, you search for the object, but in this case, you use the string of mode equal to X, and it tells you who's the one that's actually holding this row cache NQ object. You continue going through it further, you see a process that's doing a cursor pin wait S on X. That means someone has invalidated the cursor package that is basically holding this exclusive lock, and then while it tries to get a request for shared mode, it has to release and invalidate this package. To find more details about this, there's a section called IDN equal to. You find the IDN number, and then you go down to this particular thing. It shows you the SID 3094 that's holding the mutex. Now remember, this is a very complicated example, but I've tried to show you as many things that you can search for in a system state dump and how you can find out what the ultimate blocker is. Now, this is not going to be something that you will use on a daily basis to find who's stuck on your database. There's a view called $wait_chains. You will select star from $wait_chains. It will show you the waiter, and it will show you who's waiting on whom. But this is a way to look at the internals and find out who exactly is holding the specific resource. So at the end of the whole chain, there's somebody that's waiting for a library cache lock on this particular resource that you're trying to lock. And you have to find this particular session, and you have to kill this session. So this is system state dumps. I went from a TX lock to a holder to a row cache lock to a library cache lock. And then the last person is actually waiting for latch free. So there's a latch contention that's basically causing this TX wait to happen. And I have to find out who holds this latch. And it is somebody that is trying to invalidate the cursor from this. And the query that's holding this whole thing up is doing select user from dual. and that has locked the other TX queries. So this is how you can troubleshoot an entire end-to-end scenario and look at who's holding what resource. And what I've done is I've shown you what the various things are. When you get these slides, look at the things that are in red, and that's how you interpret how do you look at these system state dumps. This is tip number 1. How do you read system states? The second one is, as I mentioned, 20C is coming up. And there are some people that are already using pluggable databases in 19C. And if you want to troubleshoot this, you want to take ADDM. You want to do an ADDM report of the entire container database. You also want to sometimes do an ADDM just of a pluggable database. Now, in the earlier versions, in 12C, ADDM is enabled by default in the root container of a CDB. You can also use ADDM in a PDB, but it doesn't work by default. It does work by default in 20C, but for 19C, you have to set these two commands. You have to say alter system set AWR PDB auto flush enabled equal to true, and you also have to exec DBMS workload repository modify snapshot settings and say interval is 60. Once you execute these things, then you can subsequently take ADDM snapshots inside a PDB. This is very useful if you're troubleshooting something only within the context of a single PDB. Tip number 3. Now, a lot of times we're looking at logs. Someone gives you a 2 GB log and you have to look at the whole log and you're like, I don't know what I'm looking for in this log. A lot of times people grep for something they're looking for in a log, but sometimes the grep does not cover all the problems that you're looking for. So what do? There's an option called TFACTL analyze. When you do TFACTL analyze minus sense one day, it scans all the logs and basically shows you everything that's inside that log, and it summarizes it in a histogram way. I'm going to go ahead a couple of slides and show you something, then I'll come back. So look at this one here. So when you run analyze, it's going to show you this. It has taken these logs and it tells you that these logs are repeated this many number of times. And what is the percentage of the log that contains that line? So this log, 47% of this log is the first line. 15% of this log is the second line. But I'm interested in two things, which is the third and the fourth lines, which show disk failures. And that is about 20% of this log file. So what it does is it gives you a histogram view of the entire log. And that makes it really fast for you to find out, is it worth looking at this particular log or not? This is called the TFACTL analyze command. This is the command, TFACTL analyze minus sense one day. You can run this on your system today, and it will basically summarize all the errors in your alert log and show you what is in those logs. You can run many other commands. You can also say analyze search or a 4031 minus last one day. This will basically look for 4031s across your entire system. These are all the other kinds of commands that you can execute. Analyze minus sense 5 hours, analyze component OS for the last one day, search for Aura errors since the last 2 days, search for starting instance since the last 2 days, analyze OS Watcher. So OS Watcher is a tool that we ship since I think 12 to 18C, and it runs by default in a customer environment and gives people data about the OS when we are troubleshooting something, when we want to fix it. If you want to summarize OS Watcher output, these are the commands for that. And the same thing for slab info. Slab info is basically how do you look at kernel, Linux kernel slab info, and how do you analyze it over a period of time. Now, what I've also done is, these are the commands. I also have outputs of these commands in my slides. So when you look at my slides, you can see what the outputs of these commands are and what they will look like when you run them on your machine. You can run all these commands today. Search for Aura since the last 7 days. This will search for all the Aura errors across all the alert logs on all the machines across all the homes for the last 7 days. It's pretty cool. This is, you go for lunch and you come back and something goes wrong. I can analyze OS watcher data since the last 6 hours. Now this will tell you when was the highest, when was the lowest, when was the average, and what percentage increase happened for any of these values. If you look at the last column, the number of users went up by 20%. So this tells you not just what time the system was idle the most, was busy the most, but how much swap increased, how many total number of processes increased, how much was the utilization, did it increase or did it decrease? It gives you a very good idea of your machine as to what is going on with it by just running the single command. The same thing for slab info. It tells you the various kinds of slabs, how much it increased, how much it decreased. You can actually run the same command. This is a from and a to option. So you can specify a from, sorry?
Oh,
I think someone is not muted.
Yes, Sandesh, I am searching for him.
Okay.
Yeah, I have muted. I have muted him.
All right. Thank you. The fourth tip is when your database is hung. How do you connect to a database that's hung to get diagnostics? There is something called a prelim mode. When a database is completely hung, sometimes you cannot connect to it for diagnostics. So you have to use SQL plus minus prelim slash assist DBA. This will use something called a preliminary connection, and this will have limited access to the SGA, but this will help you capture diagnostic information like a system state dump when you connect to an instance. So this is called prelim, and this is tip number 4. Many times we have to contact Oracle support for finding solutions for our problems, but do you also know that there is a way to use automation that Oracle support has built? It's called a troubleshooting assistant, and there are many of these, and I have actually highlighted a few of these. Now here's an example of I get Aura 60s and I want to figure out what to do with it. You have to follow the assistants, and as you select the right answer, it will point you to the note that you can look at to solve the problem, or it will give you the solution directly. There are many, many assistants like this. This is for startup and shutdown issues. I can say, do I have a shutdown issue? Do I have an automation issue? Do I have multi-tenant related issues? And once I pick a startup issue, it tells me what kind of startup issue. Do you have a startup issue when you're doing, are you encountering an Aura error? Are you having a slow startup? Are you having transaction recovery issues? As you pick different values, the question changes, and you can specify the questions. And then as you specify the questions, it will tell you exactly what to do to solve this problem. As DBAs, you should use more and more of this automation because it will help you do things a lot more faster. This is for startup. This is for undo management. The same thing, I can keep picking the answers to the questions. So there's a lot of this automation that tells you what are the various kinds of things you have to do. So there's undo management, there's startup, there's block corruptions. This is one thing that most DBAs are terrified of, is what happens when I get a block corruption. You have to go through this to basically look at questions. And then you say what objects are affected. It'll ask you the details of the objects that are affected. And how do you find out the objects that are affected? It'll tell you what commands to run on the right-hand side to find the objects that are affected. And once you find the cluster that is affected, it will tell you run this command to find out what the owner is. If the owner is sys, then contact Oracle support. You most likely will require recovery. Otherwise, you can do other things. So it's really good to use all of this automation. And these are assistants that are built into My Oracle support, where you can enter questions and you can get answers and you can execute things. Tip number 6. If you're trying to do a health check for a SQL, there's this thing called SQL HC. You can download this script. It's free, it doesn't require any license. And when you do this, you just say start SQL HC as SQL and specify whether you, but the thing that you need for this is you do need to have the diagnostics tuning pack, which most customers usually have. If you're using the AWR, you have the diagnostics and tuning pack. That's the only limitation of this. The tool itself is free, but the data sits in the AWR, for which you require the diagnostics and tuning pack. You specify start SQL at c.sql, you specify the tuning pack, and then you specify the SQL ID. Once you do that, it goes through that and automatically applies and gives you recommendations of what you can do for this particular SQL, based on the base statistics, based on potential for improvement, and what are the various parameters you can change, and also the SQL that's generated as the output at the back of the report. All this information is present in this output. This is called SQL health check. Tip number 7. Many times DBAs don't know that you can actually query trace files directly using SQL. You don't have to get out of the SQL plus prompt. You can say describe $diag underscore trace file, and you can see all the fields for this. Then you can say there's another view called $diag trace file contents. What you can do with this is you can select and see all the trace files that are on your system. Now out of this, I want to say either directly I can select the output of a log file and I can see the payload output of it on my screen. Great, this sounds good. What else can I do? I can also go to something called diag sys SQL trace records. Now what this does is I can look at SQL tracing. If I have turned on SQL tracing, I can go and turn on and check what's happening with SQL tracing, and I don't have to leave the SQL prompt. Here's an example. I select a SID and a serial hash from $session, and I use execute dbms system set SQL trace in session, and I specify this SID and serial hash. Now this enables SQL tracing. Now what I do here is I do select unique trace file name from $diag sys SQL trace records. And what this does is it gives me the trace file name of what I am running the trace on. Then I do a select payload from $diag sys SQL trace records, where trace file name is equal to something, and I can start seeing the output of the tracing. All this without leaving the SQL prompt. When I'm finished, I can do execute dbms system set SQL trace in session, and I can turn off the SQL tracing. So as you can see, I've turned on SQL tracing. I've selected found the file. I've selected the output of the file, and I can see all the output of the SQL tracing, and I can turn off the SQL tracing. I can do all of this stuff without leaving the SQL prompt. I don't have to go to the OS anymore. Pretty cool. Tip number 8. Hanganalyze enhancements. The database by default has Hanganalyze components that basically are always on. Now, what does this do? And why do I care about it? As a DBA, hangs and deadlocks are always the worst nightmare. And you're always trying to figure out, what do I do to fix this? So by default, as of 12.2, there's been an initial version of the hang check manager that is always on. What it does is it just detects hangs. There are certain kinds of hangs that are autonomously fixed. As we went to 18C, we started logging all detections and resolutions. As we went to 19C, we have a new SQL-based interface to configure sensitivity as well as trace file sizes. So as a DBA, why do I care about all this? I don't. The thing automatically kills all the sessions that are basically getting my database stuck. A feature in 19C is if there is a database session that is hung because of ASM, it will kill the blocker in ASM, despite the fact that the hang has happened in ASM. So you don't need to do this. It automatically detects which instance of ASM has the hang and kills the session in ASM so the database can proceed. That's a cool new 19C feature. In the log file, you will basically see that it has detected a hang and it is requesting termination of a particular process on a remote instance, and what is the hang ID and how sure it is. that this one is going to kill this particular session and it's going to free a whole bunch of stuff. And by default, it's an automatic hang resolution, which means the DBA is not killing these sessions. The database itself is keeping the sessions killed because it knows that the session is going to pile up a huge number of sessions on the system. So whenever something detects a huge pileup of sessions that's going to cause the database to have problems, it's going to automatically start killing sessions. It's not going to kill sessions for user application locks, but it is going to kill sessions that are going to block the database, that are going to block the control file. The process that does all of this is called DIA0. That process is responsible for looking for hangs and automatically executing hang resolution on these hangs. Tip number 9. A lot of times people perform operations on their Oracle home and something goes wrong. And after you finish the operation, you realize that, oh crap, what was the permission on that thing? But they don't remember because you never captured it. AuraCheck is a utility that can be used to capture this. So the command is tfactl AuraCheck or tfactl exacheck, depending on if you're running Exadata, you have to use exacheck. Minus file attribute start, include there in the directory where your home is, and it will automatically look. If you don't specify include there, it will automatically look for your Oracle homes. And it takes a snapshot of all the file attributes of those directories. Once you finish the snapshot, you basically run your patching. And after that, you do a file attribute check. When you do a file attribute check, it finds the difference in all of the attributes and stores this output somewhere. In case tomorrow the patching has not gone properly, you can go back and find the original permissions of all the files that were changed during the patching process. This is very useful if you missed a step during the patching process, and then you want to check if the permissions of the file were wrong before you started the patching, or you missed a step as a result of which the permission of the file is wrong because you missed a step. You can detect the difference between the two if you track your file attributes. So before you apply a database patch, run this command and store the output of your Oracle homes so that you can compare them after you finish running the database patches. Very, very useful. Tip number 10, event notifications. Whenever there's a problem on your system, you can set event notifications to automatically send you exacheck or AuraCheck reports, as well as whenever there's an assert, you can get this report in your email, where you're coming in the train or you're driving in your car and it tells you that something has gone wrong, and you can see the call stack and possible solutions for what you can do to this particular problem, all on your phone before you get to your office, and you already know the problem of what it is. That is tip number 10. Tip number 11. Many times we get Aura 600s, and the first thing to do is we open an SR. What I'm telling you is not to open an SR as the first step. What you do is, when you say troubleshoot a new issue, there's an option. The first option says the TFA package. And when TFA package, you go to your machine and you run this command. It's called tfactl diag collect minus SRDC Aura 600. This will show you all the Aura 600s on your machine. You select the Aura 600 you're interested in. After you do this, it will produce a zip file. Your job is to take the zip file and go to the previous screen and upload the zip file into MOS. And it will show you a recommendation for that Aura 600 and what to do for that Aura 600. And after you've read this document, and if you find a known patch, you apply the patch. If you don't find a known patch, then you can go ahead and file a new service request. This thing is called the Aura 600 troubleshooting tool. You need to use this before you file a new SR for any Aura 600. And you use TFA or Trace File Analyzer to basically collect the data that corresponds to the logs that are present on this machine. Tip number 12, AWR scripts. Everybody knows what the AWR is. It collects performance statistics. It's been there since database 10G. Everything is stored in both memory and the database. The whole thing is based on systime model or $systime model and $systime model. Some of the system and session statistics are also queryable from $systat and $sestat. An active session history is a sub-second sampling of data that basically represents all the recent history in the session. We know all of this stuff. Okay, so what's the deal? Whenever somebody asks you for an AWR report, the first thing everybody does is they create a snapshot, and then they create another snapshot, and that is create a snapshot, run your workload, create another snapshot, and then they run this thing called AWR rpt.sql to get their data. But this is very, very limited. Sometimes you have a rack instance, it only gives you the local instance data. So do you know that for the AWR, there are so many more scripts that most people don't know or don't use? The first one is used to compare periods in the local database. So you can run AWR DDRPT to basically compare the different snapshots and give you the diff of the snapshots and not the individual snapshots themselves. A DDRPTI RPI basically gives you for a specific instance. If you have a rack database, you always run AWR G DRPT, not AWR RPT, AWR G DRPT.SQL. That gives you the local, it gives you AWR compare periods for the rack instance on the local database. If you want to run something for the entire rack database, you basically run AWR grpt.sql, not AWR rpt.sql, AWR grpt.sql. That is a global AWR for rack. Do not give a single instance report when you're troubleshooting a rack problem. If you want to run a SQL statement report, it's AWR sqrpt.sql. If you want to run information on the AWR repository, it is AWR info.sql. Many DBAs do not know these scripts exist. Please use the appropriate script when you are sending output for performance analysis for the appropriate scenario. Most people love comparative reports because comparative reports tell you exactly what is good, what is bad. If you give a central report, then nobody knows what to look for in this report. And that's why comparative reports are very useful. Tip number 13. A lot of times, people give us ExaCheck or AuraCheck reports for analyzing their systems. I don't know how many people here know about ExaCheck or AuraCheck. This is a utility that has been around for the last 10 years. If you don't know it, please look it up on Moz. You can run best practices automation using AuraCheck on regular systems. On Exadata, you have to use ExaCheck. It allows you to go through and analyze issues, and we basically run more than 3,000 something checks to basically find out what is happening on the system. And a lot of stuff is captured as part of this process. Some customers don't like it. They provide this option called sanitize, where we basically obfuscate a sensitive value with random characters. So when you run a sanitized host name, the report basically contains a garbage host name, not your real host name. So we can see, this is basically an output of an AuraCheck report, by the way. We can see your host name, but not the real host name that you have on your machine. On your machine, you can basically reverse map the particular host to give back the original entity name. Now, this is one of my favorites. Every time there's a problem on a system, the Oracle DBA gets blamed for it if it's an Oracle database problem, because they're like, no, it's Oracle that's not working, so it has to be the DBA's fault. So the common thing here is that what has changed? So I've troubleshooted issues for the last 15 to 20 years, and every time I ask 3 questions. Did this ever work before? The second thing is, what did you change at that time, or what were you doing when this thing stopped working? And third is, have there been any changes on the system in the past? Operating system changes, patching, hardware changes, database patching, or anything that represents a change in your application that may have caused these kind of problems? And the answer always is nothing has changed. The disks are performing well, the network is all okay, and it's the Oracle DBA's fault. So what we did was we added this thing. It's called TFA-CTL changes. Now what that does is it basically allows us to track changes, and everything that has changed on your system, from a parameter to a patch application to a database patch application, is all tracked, and it displays the old and new value and the time the value was changed. So all you have to do is run this command, and it tells you everything on your machine that has changed. It can help you troubleshoot and fix problems a lot more faster, a lot more effectively. This is called TFA-CTL changes, and this is already present on your box. A lot of times, DBAs spend a huge amount of time collecting log files for SRs. It's not a great thing to do. Usually it's a huge waste of time. We decided to build something called TFA, or Trace File Analyzer, that allows you to detect and collect all this stuff using SRDCs. Now, what are SRDCs? SRDCs are problems that represent individual kinds of categories. And all you have to do is specify the SRDC type and the SR number to upload the problem directly to the SR. How do you do this? If I'm looking at a performance issue, this is what you would do today. On the left-hand side, you would generate an ADDM report. You would identify good and bad problem periods. You would generate AWR compare reports. You would generate ASH reports. You would generate OS Watcher data, Hanganalyze at level 4, SQL health checks for a particular problem ID. You would run any other support script, check the alert log, and get all the trace files during this problem period. And you would do all of this and upload them to the SR. And it would take you about 45 minutes to do all of this. Instead, you could run a single command with an SRDC of dbperf. It will ask you for the good and the bad timings, and you specify the SR number. It will run everything on the left and generate a zip file and upload it to the SR, and will take about 2 to 3 minutes. So this is a faster way for collecting diagnostic data and automating this and uploading this to the SR. Here's an example. I specify an SRDC of Aura 600, and every Aura 600 is displayed. I can pick whatever SRDCs I want, and it uploads everything back. So this is as simple as how do you use SRDCs. When you get my presentation, there are more Moss notes on how do you call the other SRDCs. Tip number 16, manage logs. Many times, people are trying to figure out how to look at their logs. So I'll skip this one slide and go a little bit ahead. So first thing is, people want to find out how much their Oracle home is consuming. Use TFA-CTL manage logs minus show usage. It comes back in less than a second, and it tells you how much space you're consuming. On the contrary, if you run du minus sk or du minus sm, it takes forever. This is a fast way to find out how much you are consuming. You can specify minus gi to only show you grid infrastructure, minus database to only show you database stuff. You can save minus show variations, and this basically shows you that which directory over the last 30 days has suddenly started to consume more amount of space. The goal here is to find out who is consuming more space as compared to, okay, this is what the individual consumption was, and this is what the new consumption is. So the whole idea here is to find the directory that you absolutely need to delete and not delete the other files that you might otherwise require for troubleshooting this particular problem. The same thing, there's a purge option. The purge option allows you to delete logs older than a certain amount of time and tells you how much amount of space is going to be freed. Now you could always run it with the minus dry run option, which will basically not delete anything but just tell you what it's going to do. And you can decide based on the amount of space consumption that's going to be freed as to whether you need to use this or not. Now I look at this and see I'm going to free about 445 megs in grid infrastructure and about 66 megs. So this is about 500 megs, and I'm going to go ahead with it. And I remove the minus dry run flag, and it goes and deletes everything. Now I can use the same command to delete the logs from all the nodes of the cluster in a rack environment. So this is pretty cool. So this is how you can view your log usage. You can purge the log usage. You can set this up in your cron to delete the logs. Instead of setting up cron on every machine, you can just do it in one machine. And this tells you how much percentage was before and after when it freed. Tip number 17, how do you monitor multiple logs? A lot of times people do tail alert log, but if I do tfsctl tail alert, this will show you the last 10 lines of every alert log on every home from every machine. Pretty cool. The same thing I can do for tail minus f. I can do the same thing for VI. So I can say tfsctl tail something, tfsctl VI something, and the name I'm giving, tfsctl tail alert. Alert is just a string. So if I want to monitor pmon files, I can say tfsctl tail pmon, and it will show me the last 10 lines of every pmon file for every instance running on every node. That's pretty cool. So when you come back from lunch and somebody tells you some database is not working and they don't know which database it is, just say tfsctl tail alert. It'll show you the last 10 lines of every alert log. You know which database you're looking for. That's how easy it is. Tip number 18, how do you monitor database performance? There's a tool. It's basically called Auratop. Auratop allows you to do near real-time database monitoring, and it's free. It works for single instance and rack. You can monitor all current database activities, identify contention, bottleneck, performance in SQL monitoring, process monitoring. It does all of this stuff along with active data guard support and multi-tenant support as part of 19C. It has different screens. This is the screen that you have to do, and this is the command that you have to run. Just say tfsctl run Auratop minus database something, and it basically shows you this is a two machine system, and it shows you everything that you can do here. It shows you the events, the total number of waits, the SQLs, which SQL is an insert, update, delete, what wait event it's been waiting on, how long it's been waiting on, and is it blocking anybody? Anything in red means you have to look at it. That's how simple this thing is. It's called Auratop, and this is available as part of your system. The different sections, there's a database global section, there's an instance specific database instance activity session, there's an AWR like top 5 timed event section, and there's a SQL processes or SQL mode information section. all this can be toggled. You can go into details of either one of these sections. So when you're running Auratop, you can press H and you can see a help of all the various options of what you can do with this utility. Number 19, analyze OS metrics. OS Watcher is installed by default on your system. It runs standard Unix utilities and it basically summarizes graphs and reports collected metrics and is required for troubleshooting most issues. But there's a command here. It's called tfactl run oswbb. What this command does is it analyzes all the OS Watcher data, and then you can either generate images to look at, or the best option is to basically do analyze data or press A. What that does is it generates information about the OS metrics. So if you are a DBA and you don't know much about a system anyways and you don't care, you can run this and you can select A to analyze the data, get a text report, and you can look at the recommendations and you can give them to your sysadmin to implement. That's how cool this is. It allows a DBA to understand the system without understanding the system. So you don't need to go through all the data. It analyzes this data for you. And it even generates these kind of graphs that you can look at. These are the older versions of the graphs. The newer ones look even nicer than this. So this is called OS Watcher, and the command is tfsctl run oswbb. The last tip and the end of this session is, and before we go to questions, is how do you troubleshoot a rack database and its health? There's this thing called cluster health monitor, which is constantly collecting all OS information on a machine, netstat, everything. Now what we do is we basically process all this information using a machine learning engine, and we look at OS and database data. All this is cool, but as a DBA, what do I need to do? So the first thing you need to do is, by default, this works on 12.2 and higher. You need to do a charctl query calibration for the cluster, and you specify a begin and end time when your system is running really well. Like this is considering what your normal is. By default, it goes and scans disk reads, disk writes, and looks for mean, median, standard deviation, min, and max values for each and every one of these things. At the same time, it also scans disk throughput and IO per second. It scans for CPU utilization and looks at all this stuff. Once you do this, you can basically start using the new model that you've calibrated. So you calibrate the cluster, you do it once, and you specify a time that is good for your system, that your system runs well. Then you monitor the cluster using this model and verify that the new model is working. These steps need to be done once, and that's it. Then subsequently, you can enable the monitoring for your database. Now you can choose to monitor a specific database, or you can monitor all databases by default. You run this command once. All this is once. So you calibrate, you monitor the cluster and establish the new model. You verify that the model is working. You monitor the databases. You again verify that the databases are being monitored successfully. And then this is the only command you need to run every time you're looking for a problem. charctl query diagnosis minus database name and start and end time. That's it. And anytime there's a problem, it will run through all the thing and show you recommendations of what you can do to fix this problem. This is the only command you have to run every time after you run all those commands once in the lifetime of that system. This will tell you what is happening from a performance perspective and what to do for root cause analysis for that particular system. And it also generates an HTML output for this thing. This was 20 tips and tricks for troubleshooting and diagnosing database 19C. I hope this was useful.
Sandesh, this was
Question.
excellent. I have a few questions, if that's okay.
Fire away.
Yeah. So, what is the CPU utilization or the impact of running the Aura top? I mean, does it have some consequences?
We're looking at probably about 10 to 15% of a CPU when you run it.
That's minor.
It's minor because it only queries $session, $session wait, and views like this. I would suggest run it and see. We have never noticed it to be too much because it just queries views and displays the same thing in the output.
All right, thank you. And the next question is, which of these, I understand some of these features are available for versions apart from 19C. So is it possible
That is correct.
Is it possible for you to summarize which of these could be used on lower versions apart from 19C?
So about 90% of these are available on previous versions. There are just some features like support for PDBs, support for active data guard. These features will not be available in the older versions. So whenever that particular feature didn't exist, then that feature will not work for that particular component. Like if there was no CDB, then it would not work for a CDB. If there's no active data guard, it would not work for active data guard.
All right, thank you. And last question, Sandesh. You spoke about, there was a point about patching, I mean, doing an activity or getting the statistics before patching and post patching, right? Just to compare the integrity. Is there any way that we can, on a random basis, we can check the integrity of the home? Is there any command as such, or is there any way we can do that?
No, because the thing is, there's nothing called an integrity of a home because the permissions depend on the UMass settings that you have specified. Usually, the things that go wrong in a home are permissions and ownership. So the only way to do it is to create a baseline and compare itself against your baseline. Now, the baseline is not the same because it depends on your UMass settings. If your UMass settings are different, your permissions will be different. So,
okay,
go ahead, please.
Because troubleshooting in that area is definitely challenging. If something goes wrong with the home, then it's not easy to troubleshoot.
Use gold images. That's where you use FPP and fleet patching. See, in most cases, in most of the large companies that I work with, people make use of FPP or fleet patching, which also used to be called rapid home provisioning in the earlier releases, where people make use of gold images. So you just swap out gold images of homes. You don't patch a home. You patch a centralized version of a software code base, and you push that software code base to all the new homes. So it's like unmounting a file system and mounting the separate file system and then doing startup from the new file system. So you never do an OPatch apply ever again because you're shipping centralized gold images. And that is what the fleet patching and provisioning or the FPP product does.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
So guys, any questions?
Sandesh, I have one more question. We've generally seen we've seen issues in database, but those are not actually issues in database. Probably something to do with the subsystem layer, like the OS or the storage. Recently, for example, we saw log file sync wait event. The average millisecond wait was somewhere around 200 milliseconds, which is pretty high. Then we drilled down and we involved the storage folks, and then probably it was identified that some of the devices weren't functioning well. So is there any way the tools or where we can identify something is wrong at the subsystem layer and not in Oracle database?
There are several views that basically expose this sort of information. VDollar OS stat being one of them. All the tools that I've shown you today will basically pinpoint the problem to be at the OS layer. If you run a charctl query diagnosis, it will pinpoint to the OS layer. If you run an Aura top, it will show you all the weights at the storage layer. Log file sync is pretty obvious. I mean, if you see a log file parallel write and it takes anywhere more than 200 microseconds for an average disk, you're already running over and you have to go talk to the storage folks to fix it. So all the Oracle wait events will demonstrate themselves as pointing towards disk. Either you'll get ASM related wait events, or you'll get DB file sequential read or DB file parallel read or parallel write wait events, Or you'll see log file sync related events, which means the log writer is not able to keep up, or it's not able to keep up the current pace of commits. So the database is fairly well instrumented. If you do read all our OS stat, it will tell you whether your weights are on the CPU or whether they are on the disk. So it's, when you're looking at something, it's fairly obvious that you are looking at an OS.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandesh.
By the way, for log file sync, there's also a script for log file sync, because log file sync generically can mean a lot of things. We created a script that allows you to run that script and to tell you what problem specific to log file sync are you hitting.
Okay. Right. Thank you so much, Sandesh, for your
No
answers.
worries.
Yeah, Sandesh, one question. This people are asking for slide deck. So is this available on this your URL which you've given on slide share?
Yep.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thank
No
you.
worries.
Sandesh wasn't here. I just have a generic doubt.
Go ahead.
So if I ask you, like, what would be the future of a Oracle DBA, let's say the next 5 years, what would be your call, or what will be your thoughts on this?
That's a very interesting question, and that's kind of the number one question in most of the places that I go. There's the role of the Oracle DBA over the last 20 years has been significantly evolving. It started off by installing database software, managing the databases, creating table spaces, doing backups, managing undo segments. Then managing undo segments went away with automated undo management. Then database homes started getting more and more automated. Patching became much easier. All the stuff that required us to take downtime basically started going away. You could move tables without actually having to, you could reorg tables, you could reorg objects, you could reorg partitions without having to take any downtime. Clusterware came in, and the DBA basically went into the clusterware business. Rack came in as a high scalable and available option. The DBA went into the business of high availability, running a complex piece of software across various nodes that would have all sorts of OS ramifications, networking ramifications, broadcasting broadcasting packets across InfiniBand related conversations. Then Exadata came in, then the DBA went into a database machine administration role where the DBA was no longer responsible for the database, but was responsible for the disks, was responsible for firmware patching, was responsible for InfiniBand related issues, was trying to understand how to fit an Exadata rack into a specific thing, and goes into how much amount of power is needed, whether it's a 3-power phase, and all these kind of conversations. So the DBA moved very far away from the database and just doing only databasey stuff, started going into the entire system. The last couple of years, cloud came on, and a lot of the work that the traditional DBA has been doing started going away because the hardware is automated, and then you can just create a simple YAML file to basically stand up a piece of infrastructure. So the software provisioning, software patching, backup recovery, and all of these tasks slowly started going away. But the things that continue to evolve is basically the DBAs went into BI, went into analytics, went into reporting, went into performance tuning. Then AI and machine learning kind of came up on the thing, and then DBAs started working outside the database, pushing data into Hadoop, getting into NoSQL, trying to put their hands into all of these other things. But then Oracle released this thing in 9i called Oracle Data Mining. But of course, DBAs are scared to say, oh, I want to learn all this statistical mathematical stuff. But then what's happened in the last couple of years is all these packages in machine learning are now available inside the database. So you can write simple DBMS data mining functions to apply AI and machine learning on top of data. So the role of the DBA from being a database management person has significantly shifted to being a data platform management person. So you're responsible as a data for the data. You're a curator for the data. You're not a curator for the database anymore. So the database can be in an Exadata, and you have to handle everything that's associated with an Exadata box. If you are trying to build more value for your business, then you're doing fraud detection. You're trying to find all sorts of interesting use cases out of the data that you have. Earlier, you're restricted to analytic reports. Now you're running AI on top of the data that you already have, and you're trying to pull out BI on top of AI kind of interesting analytical reports. So the DBA has now evolved to a cloud DBA, where you've lost access to some of the stuff that you used to do before, like patching, provisioning, installation of software, table space creation, killing users whenever they're doing pesky things, to running analytical reports, managing thousands of databases with simple APIs, working on databases in Docker containers, trying to take data and massage them and convert them to Parquet format, move them across different databases, working on NoSQL, and trying to basically have a polyglot existence. So the whole concept of DBA being centered on just the database is changing. The ecosystem is changing, but the amount of stuff that the DBA has to do has significantly increased over the last couple of years. So just like how old versions and new versions keep coming out over old versions, and there are new features to learn in those things, as long as you continue learning, you'll be fine. As long as you continue evolving with your job and what is required of you. I know DBAs that never moved from databases to Exadata because they didn't want to do hardware, and that was a limiting factor. Now people that are used to doing patching, provisioning, and backup recovery don't want to move to cloud. Now these are natural evolutions. You need to move to the next platform. You may not be doing some things that you used to do before, but you will start doing things that you never did before. I know DBAs today that are configuring stuff in OCI are setting up VCN endpoints, or trying to figure out, oh, how do I give access to this only to these particular set of people, and set up access control rules. So it's like I spent a whole bunch of time working on networking rules. As a DBA earlier, I would never look at networking rules and never look at firewall rules. So this is the changing requirements of the job. You're still responsible for the data management platform, but the data management platform itself is evolving. Autonomous being one major case, where you don't have much access to the instance, but you can run OML notebooks with Zeppelin and try to do machine learning and training your machine learning models on top of database data, and do all other sorts of cool stuff with it. So the DBA job continues to change and evolve. It always has been. And you may have to let go of some of the stuff that you used to do before, but there's going to be more things that will come that will change and constantly evolve your job.
That's amazing, actually. It was with very high scope what you said. But at the basic level, Sandesh, like if being a common DBA, where do I start with to upgrade myself with all these things what you have said? Where do I start with basically?
What are you working on? What is your
I'm
environment
working
like?
mine is a pure database. Let's say 12C, 18C, 19C. I'm a pure Oracle DBA with
Start off with the new features. Start off with learning the new features in 18. Start off with new features in 19. There's so many new things for upgrades. There's so many things for container databases. Try consolidating multiple environments into multiple container databases. Try understanding the features. There's AutoML and there's machine learning in 18, in 19, in 20. We have increased the number of libraries that we have shipped and the number of algorithms we have shipped. There's AutoML in 20. All these are in the database. And all you have to do is download the software, install it, and start learning all of this. All this automation that I've given you, right, is to basically take you out of the stuff that is of no value to you and start concentrating on the things that might be more interesting for you to work on.
Perfect. And what do you suggest on like learning, getting into AWS, GCP, other clouds, NoSQL? What is
A
your
lot
thoughts
of
on?
people do this. A lot of people do this. And the problem is that this is you doing this because you're not really sure what you want to do. By trying to look, I don't care about the fact that these are competitors, but the thing that's always interesting for me is any task you do that stretches yourself thin across 500 different things, like whether it is AWS or whether it is OCI, right? There are hundreds of services in a cloud, okay? As a person, you can work on relational database management systems like Oracle, Postgres, and all of these things. You can work on NoSQL environments. You can work on streaming environments like Kafka or any of these kinds. You can work on environments that are like big data processing, like Hadoop and stuff. Each and every one of these things takes time and commitment. It depends on how deep you want to go into any of these things. What I've always seen is people try to superficially gain just enough knowledge to know how to use a particular platform, and they say, look, I know how to use this particular platform. Now, while that gets you through in the short run, if you actually get hired for a job that forces you to exercise your skills for that particular space, you will realize very quickly that you will fall short, because that's not your main core area of expertise. So think of it this way, like I grew up speaking Hindi as a language, right? And then I'm trying to learn French. And then I say, I know Hindi, I know French. But what I should actually say is, I know Hindi really well, native and bilingual proficiency, and I know elementary proficiency in French. So somebody who's from France starts talking to me in French, expects me to have a fluent conversation in French, but I'm barely keeping up, and I can't say half the words. And that's what happens when you try to spread yourself, a mile wide and an inch deep, and try to do all these certifications. The certifications are good. When someone looks at a certification and says, oh, this guy is OCI certified, and expects you to know everything about OCI, but all you have done is given a test, and you have no practical experience whatsoever on that platform. Then when you go to your new job, the guy says, hey, I thought you're OCI certified, but you don't seem to know much. You've already let your employer down by saying you have a certification or something, but you really don't know much about it. So experience and expertise on a product takes time to build. And it's very important to pick a career where whatever you invest time in, it's going to work for you for the next 2 or 3 years. Like if you decide to do OCI certification, you should know all the OCI services. You should go deep. You should create an account. You should build stuff. You should gain practical hands-on experience. You should live and breathe the technology for a year and know everything about it. Not just say, oh, I'm going to give a certification here and a certification here. An average cloud has, like, whether it is AWS or whether it is OCI, releases about 200 to 300 different kinds of services and features every year. It is practically impossible for you to keep up with these things. So I always tell this to people. Pick the thing that you're interested in and focus on it and get really good on it. People pay you because you're good on something, not because you know something. Everybody knows something. I can take a book and read something in half an hour and I can tell you what it is, but doesn't mean I can actually use it proficiently. So whatever career choice you want to do, whatever decision you want to make, if you want to work on databases, if you're a DBA, learn all the new features, start getting access to OCI, because the autonomous database is a natural extension of what you're doing, and you can create a free OCI account today. So start playing with a cloud account, start getting your hands on setting up VCNs for OCI. These are the kind of things which will be a natural extension of you being an Oracle DBA. If you go to AWS stuff, which will be something completely different. Now, say for example, you go to RDS for Oracle. It's a good thing, because hey, look, I learned Oracle. I'm just doing Oracle on another cloud, but I can use all my expertise that I have built over all these years, because experience is extremely hard to substitute or build. And whenever a new employer will hire you, they will know immediately if you just have a superficial knowledge of something or you really know your stuff. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but I think it's very important that you use these to make your choices.
Yeah, that's very much helpful. Just to add to my question, like let's say if I go to the market wants me to uh, know multiple things. I don't know whether they want me to know in depth or not, but they will search for the multiple words in your profile, or they want you to know multiple technologies. So what do you say about this, Sandesh?
I think you need to know a few things really, really well, and you can know a couple of other things superficially and put all these keywords in your resume. But the highlight is, this is what you're really good at, okay? The reality is you get indexed by search engines that put all these keywords. If somebody picks you up for being an Oracle DBA, you will succeed. If someone picks you up for being a Hadoop DBA, you may succeed if they give you the opportunity to learn this, but you will certainly not succeed if they expect you to have the experience and you don't have it. So it's irrelevant the fact that someone found you. They found you for a job you're not equipped for. Have
Okay,
confidence in
guys,
yourself.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Have
guys, I
confidence
think
in yourself. That's all I can tell you guys.
yeah, Sandesh, thank you so much for this session, and on top of it, you gave us a DBA career consultancy and all this stuff. And guys, I think we might be, if we start conversation regarding this all this stuff, then it will be endless loop, and we will have a we will have to uh, spend a lot
I
of
won't
time.
be able to go home if that were to happen.
Yes, Sandesh. And Sandesh, thank you so much. Yeah, Sandesh is very
Sandesh,
glad.
Sandesh, this is Satish. Thank you very much for your session. It is very informative and very useful, and I made today actually with the sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. By the way, there's a lot of questions in the chat. I'm assuming that you've answered most of them, and I think I've answered
Yeah,
Yeah,
most of them, right?
sure. It's very helpful if you share that PPT or session for the reference of the future. So it
yes,
would
The
sure.
be very
We
PPT for
better.
the session is on this slide. Take a picture of this slide that's right now on your screen. The slide share link has the deck.
Okay, thank you.
and we will sharing the recording very soon. So okay, guys. So let's wrap up the session, and thank you so much, Sandesh, for all this nice session and this all these wonderful, all this very helpful information for us.
Thank you so
So
much, you guys. And I'm hoping to see you guys locally in Nepal at some
yeah,
point.
sure. We are very excited to see in person. So we hope it will happen very soon.
Likewise as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandesh.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
guys.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Sandesh. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sandesh.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Please,
Bye.
yeah,
Have a wonderful
please
weekend.
fill the feedback form.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.